Hello and welcome to Papers Past. This is the channel where we rummage through old newspapers to witness history as it really happened. So, today I'm looking at the Leicester Journal and Midland Counties Advertiser, dated the 11th of August 1826. That's almost 200 years ago. As usual with these old papers, there's a lot of fascinating stuff going on. But this is the headline which grabbed my attention on page 3. It's an account of the ascent of Mr. Green with his balloon from Nottingham Marketplace. Ballooning in the early 19th century was still in its infancy, and accidents were common. This picture shows the sad demise of Madame Sophie Blanchard when her balloon burst into flames over Paris in 1819. To be a balloonist at this time, you ideally needed to have a screw loose or to be extremely tired of living. But if you did possess either of these qualities, there was serious money to be made. Something which had obviously not gone unnoticed by Mr. Green, as we can see from this poster of the time. Let's get back to Nottingham. Ascent of Mr. Green with his balloon from Nottingham Marketplace. On Thursday the 3rd instant, being the last day of the races, the marketplace of this town presented a scene of great gaiety on the account of the ascent of Mr. Green with his balloon, a gentleman to whom we are indebted for the most important discovery in aerostation, the application of coal gas to the purposes of ascension. Precisely at 2:15 o'clock, the ballast and instruments being properly arranged, Mr. Green took his station in the car, having for a companion in his aerial flight Mr. Saywell, a gentleman of Leicester. The balloon was released from its moorings, and at 10 minutes before 2 the ascent took place, amidst the cheers and clapping of the hands of the congregated thousands who witnessed the magnificent spectacle. Such a signal display of scientific power and enterprise could not but excite the admiration of the numerous spectators who lined the marketplace, and of such as were stationed at the windows and on the tops of buildings. The balloon rose in the most majestic style and continued perpendicular over the marketplace for many minutes, the aerial travellers waving their flag all the while. It then took a direction towards Wilford and seemed to be on the point of entering a dense cloud, but was carried apparently by a current of air across the Trent towards Plumtree. Soon afterwards the balloon was obscured by a cloud, but reappeared in a few minutes. It continued in view from first to last, full 50 minutes, and was at last seen to descend somewhere, it was supposed, about the village of Edwalton, 4 miles from hence. We have since learnt that such was the case, and that the travellers reached Terra Firma in safety, having descended in a field close to the village we have named, belonging to Mr. Holmes, who, having observed them, hastened to the spot to render them every assistance in his power. Mr. Holmes kindly invited the parties to his house and entertained them in a most hospitable manner. Mr. Saywell, relying confidently on Mr. Green's skill in the management of the balloon, did not evince the least fear, but remained firm and collected during the voyage. Indeed, Mr. Green had never before had such an undaunted companion. The parties returned to Nottingham in the evening, in a chaise and four, and were warmly greeted on their arrival by the gentlemen of the committee, assembled at the George IV Inn, where they met to dine. So who was this madman, Charles Green? Turns out he was the most famous English balloonist of the 19th century. He was born in London in 1785, the son of a fruiterer. When he left school he joined his father's business. Maybe it was staring at melons all day that inspired him, because in 1821 he made his first balloon flight from Green Park in London, as part of the celebrations for George IV's coronation. As the newspaper clip pointed out, he was the first balloonist to use coal gas, which was much cheaper than hydrogen, more commonly used at that time. But this first balloon trip was nearly his last. His balloon got into trouble over the sea and he had to be saved by a passing ship. In 1822 he was lucky to escape with his life when some nice person cut the ropes holding his basket to the balloon. He and his companion survived by clinging desperately onto the ring of the balloon. They both suffered serious injuries though when the balloon finally fell to earth. In another flight he got caught up in a thunder and lightning storm, which he also managed to weather with some difficulty. Meanwhile, fellow balloonists were not so lucky, such as Lieutenant Harris here, killed in a balloon accident over London in 1824. Seemingly unfazed by all this though, Charles Green merely sought to make his shows more and more spectacular, with night ascents, fireworks and a parachuting monkey called Jacopo. He even went up on one flight astride his pony, which actually went down like a lead balloon with the animal rights campaigners of the time. By the 1830s, Charles had become one of the most famous balloonists in England, and he and his balloon had become a major fixture at the trendy and prestigious Royal Gardens at Vauxhall. However, to keep up with the competition, Charles needed to make his ascents ever more daring and spectacular. Note that the poster for this show advertises a double, simultaneous ascent at night with music and fireworks. In 1836, Charles built a gigantic balloon designed to stay up even longer and travel greater distances. On the 7th of November that same year, he took off from Vauxhall with two companions with the aim of crossing the Channel and landing somewhere in Europe. They crossed the Channel at Dover. They certainly didn't intend to go hungry on the trip. The list of provisions included 12 fowls, 2 tongues, 8 dozen biscuits, 2 dozen penny rolls, a large piece of cold boiled beef, 2 gallons of coffee ready-made, etc. And with 1 gallon of sherry and 2 quarts of brandy, they certainly intended to enjoy themselves, which apparently they did by shouting with a loud hailer and dangling fireworks over bemused peasants down below. The 3 merry men and their balloon crossed into mainland Europe in the early hours of the morning. At 7:30 a.m, probably completely sloshed and not sure where they were, they decided they had proved their point, and they landed in the county of Nassau, just outside the German town of Weilburg. They had been in the air for 18 hours and travelled nearly 500 miles, a world record. This picture, which now hangs in the National Portrait Gallery in London, depicts Charles Green and his companions plotting their famous flight to Nassau. Charles is the gentleman seated on the right. Now, if you thought Charles Green was a bit mad, he was nothing compared to this man. Robert Cocking was a professional watercolour artist who had spent many years designing and perfecting a parachute. It was quite a bulky contraption, as you can see from the picture, but Charles Green's Great Nassau Balloon, as it was now called, would be just perfect to launch his parachute from, and so Cocking managed to persuade Green to let him launch his parachute from the balloon. The event took place as the main attraction of a grand day fete at Vauxhall Gardens on the 24th of July 1837. With the balloon at about 5,000 feet or 1 mile above Greenwich, and Cocking suspended beneath the balloon, the decision was made to release the parachute. Cocking's final words were, "Well now, I think I shall leave you. Good night, Spencer. Good night, Green," he yelled, and then cut the tether. The great balloon hurtled skywards with Green and Spencer struggling to keep it under control, but eventually they managed to do so and land safely near Maidstone. As for cocking, to the large crowd gathered below, it was obvious that the parachutist was in trouble. Due to his miscalculations, his descent was much too quick, and the entire apparatus turned inside out, and poor old Cocking plunged into the history books as the world's first parachute death. Charles Green went on to break more ballooning records, including reaching an altitude of over 27,000 feet, 5¼ miles. He invented the trailing rope used to control takeoff and landing, and he even designed a working model of a propeller-driven balloon in 1840 with the aim of crossing the Atlantic, although he never actually did this. He retired from ballooning in 1854 and reached the ripe old age of 85. He's buried in Highgate Cemetery, and although his gravestone features part of a balloon mounted on a plinth, I wonder just how many passers-by realised that the man lying beneath this stone was once the most famous balloonist in Britain.